Erica, add me as a friend on Facebook so I can share your posts. I just requested.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Thank you for being here on this very, very important conversation. I ask that you share this out tonight because we need to hear about what is happening to our folks in Palestine. Tonight, my name is Reverend Erica Williams, and I am the founding pastor of Set It Off Ministries. In collaboration tonight with the General Baker Institute, we are here tonight to talk about the Israeli and Palestinian conflict. We are so deeply honored tonight to have our dear sister and comrade and friend, Linda Sarsour, with us tonight. We're not here for no games or to play. We're here tonight to make it plain and to set it straight in terms of what is happening to our kinfolks across the sea. And so tonight we stand here boldly declaring, from the river to the sea, Palestine must be free. And so tonight we are so grateful for Sister Linda joining us tonight. And tonight my heart is just so full tonight. I've had the opportunity to go to a rally here in Seattle today and to see those children out in the streets saying we must be free, and to see children declaring that their freedom is nigh, like they know that they will not allow for this time to go backwards, but we're going forward to the liberation for the Palestinian people. And so tonight we are grateful for you joining us as we go into this conversation so that we all can do our part to make sure that the Palestinian people are free. And so tonight we're going to talk. We're going to talk about how the U.S. is sending $3.8 billion to the Israeli military as they continue to oppress our Palestinian people. We're going to talk tonight about how people like Malcolm X and others have gone forward in this fight for freedom for the Palestinian people. And we're going to talk about that brown-skinned Palestinian Jew who was also out here in the streets fighting for his people and how we must continue that fight. And so I want to get into it tonight. And so I want to bring on tonight my dear sister, Sister Linda Sarsour. Linda is one of the co-founders of Until Freedom. And I know y'all have seen her all around because our sister is fighting for all of us. She was just locked up the other day for fighting for immigration rights. She's been fighting on behalf of women and children and everybody. And so tonight we want to honor her and bring her here tonight and let us hear her heart tonight about her people. She is a Palestinian American. She has family in Palestine. And this sister is fighting hard to make sure that her people are free. So Linda, thank you for joining us tonight. It is good to see you and to have you with us.
Thank you. Pastor Erica, for having me here. You are my sister. I will go to the end of the world for you. So I appreciate you giving me this platform.
Thank you, sis. And so tonight, the day after the 73rd anniversary, the commemoration of Nakba, Palestinians remember this day as the start of the catastrophe at the hands of Israel. But we know right now what's happening in the streets. People are dying. They are being slaughtered. I'm watching the news and seeing stories of children. You shared a few days ago of 4 children being killed. The babies are dying. The Israeli military is just brutalizing people. Linda, let us know tonight what is happening on the grounds in Palestine, but also let people know what is the Nakba and what is still going on.
Thank you, Erica. It's a lot what we're watching happening right now, particularly in Gaza. We're finding entire families literally slaughtered, babies, limbs just literally blown up in bombs. There's mothers that wake up in the morning and 4 of their children have been murdered. This is not a clash. It's not a conflict. It's not a scuffle between 2 nations or 2 peoples. This is literally ethnic cleansing of Palestinians. This is about a people in Gaza who are living in the world's largest open air prison. It's not just me, Erica, that says it. Human Rights has called the state of Israel an apartheid state. Amnesty International, mainstream, Doctors Without Borders. You can call any international human rights organization and they will tell you that what is happening to Palestinians both in the West Bank and Gaza is unacceptable. Violation of international law. war crimes. The International Criminal Court has said that they have now jurisdiction over bringing Israel to the court and charging them with war crimes against Palestinians. We're not talking about politics here. We're talking about a people. And a lot of times what we hear based on the dominant narrative is that in 1948, the state of Israel was created as a safe haven for the Jewish people. But the story that is not told, that is in order for the state of Israel to be created as a safe haven for the Jewish people, it required the displacement and dispossession of the Palestinian people. 750,000 Palestinians were displaced to create the state of Israel. Over 400 villages were literally destroyed so that we can create the state of Israel as a safe haven for the Jewish people. And I say this, Erica, here unapologetically as a solidarity activist, as a human rights activist, that how can you support a state? How can you support a state for yourself to bring you safety and security at the expense of another people? If someone told me, Erica, that in order for you to have full liberation in America, it would require for us to take away liberation from Black people or from Latino people or Asian people, I do not want that safety and security, because I know that my safety and security is bound up with the safety and security of others. So at the expense of the Palestinian people, international world leaders have decided to prioritize a nation state over the lives of human beings that deserve to live with dignity and to live in freedom. And so what we're watching right now, and so for people who've kind of just tuned into this, because this is a 73-year-old, and even longer than that, Palestinians have had their olive trees burned, their homes destroyed, their land stolen from them. Our children, even as young as 8 years old, have been detained by detained by Israeli defense forces and put into prisons. Israeli armies have no regard for children. They have no regard for women. They have no regard for elders. The siege on Gaza has been going on for over 13 years. So what you're seeing today is not new. And the important thing that I want to say to people here, Erica, is that a lot of people will, especially if you don't know much about the conflict, people will say, but what about Hamas? And they use Hamas as a boogeyman in this conversation. And what's important to understand about Hamas is they were established in 1987. But the Palestinian people have been displaced, dehumanized, and vilified and dispossessed since 1948. So people just got to do the math. And if you're going to condemn Hamas for rockets, then we got to understand that Sheikh Jarrah and the residents of Sheikh Jarrah, Palestinians who are living in a predominantly Arab neighborhood in the eastern part of Jerusalem, are being forcibly evicted from their homes. You have to be able to condemn the state of Israel if you are going to come and ask people to condemn Hamas for throwing rockets. And so we have to understand also that this is not a fair fight, Erica. It's not a fair fight. The Palestinian people do not have a military. We do not have planes. We do not have tanks. We do not have control over our borders. In fact, in Gaza, they do not have control over their airspace. Sea, the maritime, is literally also controlled by the state of Israel. We have no control over imports, exports. You literally can't practically leave Gaza, nor can people go into Gaza. We're literally talking about a people that are living in a highly concentrated prison. That's what we're talking about here.
Yes, and I'm so grateful that you raised that, because I had the opportunity to go to Palestine in 2018, and my life was forever changed, because when we were going through a checkpoint heading back into Israel, and we were on a bus, and I will never ever forget this. There was a mother with her 2 children, and she had to get off the bus because the Palestinian people had to be checked and searched in order for them to enter into Israel. And so I remember the mother getting back on a bus, and I remember her holding her children tightly, and she was crying. And so I kept saying, I don't know much about this. I need to learn and to really study. But what I could understand was the people of Palestine were often defenseless against this Israeli military who had weapons, Linda. I mean, like, they came on a bus with Uzis and all kind of different weapons, and that is funded in primarily by the U.S. That is the thing that people are not taking into consideration. Our tax dollars are paying for them to oppress your people and our kin in Palestine. And so, even this week, and I would love for you to just share, I want you to float tonight, like, all the misconceptions that people have about Palestine, all the stuff they want to say about, oh, well, I'm not going to say much. I'm, kind of looking away. But honey, we can't look away right now. Don't look away. Do not look away at this moment. And even in this moment, I need folks to be educated. That's why we're here tonight, because this is serious and it's been going on 73 years. Tell folks tonight the misconceptions you have heard about Palestine and your people, and set the record straight tonight.
Oftentimes, Erica, I hear people trying to lecture the Palestinians about peace, that the Palestinian people need to step up and come to the table for peace. The Palestinian people, we know peace because we coexisted with Christians and Muslims and Jews before the state of Israel was created. My grandmother was born in 1927, 21 years before the creation of the state of Israel. She told me so many stories about going with Jewish women to the market to sell fruits, to sell vegetables. She said the census workers would come to our houses and they spoke our language, but they are people of a different faith. You know this, that in Palestine, it's Muslims and Christians, that there's no difference between both of our peoples. We are both under a military occupation. The Israeli Defense Forces have literally banned sometimes Christians from even being able to celebrate high holy holidays like Christmas and Easter and other high holy holidays. The misconception is that we don't understand coexistence, but we lived coexistence in historic Palestine. There have always been Jews. So when Zionists and right-wing Zionists claim the land for the Jewish people, I always say to them, no one ever denied that there were Jews who lived with us in peace in historic Palestine. And we are ready to coexist as we coexisted for many centuries before that. The misconception is something that we've actually done as a narrative here in the United States of America. We did this to the Native Americans. We made a narrative about them that they were savage, that they didn't have they couldn't govern themselves, that they were some chaotic people that were just kind of like, they didn't even know. No, that is the same narrative we try to do to put on the Palestinian people to justify the military occupation of the Palestinian people, that we somehow are not intelligent enough to govern ourselves or to have our own state, or to be able to have our own military, or to have and be in control of our own resources. In both Gaza and in the West Bank, we oftentimes don't have control over our electricity and our water supplies. I mean, I remember every time I go to Palestine, my grandma and my aunt would be like, be careful how many times you flush the toilet or how long you take a shower, because there is a limited water supply. And a lot of people will say, but what about the Palestinian Authority? Aren't they the governing body of the Palestinian people? Erica, it is so absurd to even say that the Palestinian Authority has any authority. When the International Criminal Court came out and said we have a jurisdiction to bring a case against the state of Israel, they invited Palestinian leaders to come to the International Criminal Court. The state of Israel denied our Palestinian leadership from traveling to the International Criminal Court. We don't even have permission to go to the International Criminal Court to defend our human rights. And so this facade that we have people who are in authority, we can't travel. Our leaders can't travel without permission. And so we are living in a state where the Palestinian people are like, how long is the international community just going to sit back and allow for the continued military occupation of the Palestinian people? This is the longest standing military occupation in modern history. And it's very similar. In fact, if you read from South African anti-apartheid leaders, believe it or not, today, they say that the apartheid in Israel and what's happening in Palestine is worse than the apartheid that was happening in South Africa decades ago. We have the solidarity of Desmond Tutu. We had the unequivocal solidarity of Nelson Mandela. We had the unequivocal solidarity of the Black Panther Party, of leaders like Angela Davis, of Kwame Ture. We had a letter that was written by the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee in 1967 in solidarity with the Palestinian Arab peoples. This long history of solidarity of civil rights movements in America with the Palestinian people. And that's why, Erica, it's so important for you and me to have this conversation, because it's not new to me that Black people are standing in solidarity with Palestinians. And to be able to broaden that coalition, to bring more Black people into this larger conversation, because it is interconnected. For example, when we talk about ending mass incarceration and private prisons in America, the same corporations that profit off of the detention and incarceration of Black and brown people in America are the same that profit off of incarceration of Palestinians. Example, companies like G4S. The police tactics that we see here being used against Black and brown people in Black and brown communities are similar tactics that we're watching the Israeli police forces and Israeli defense forces use against Palestinians. Stop and frisk tactics, the knees on the neck tactics, the chokehold tactics. And people will tell you, oh, the American police were doing that. And yes, the American police were originally slave catchers. And we understand the brutality of American police from their inception. But we also know that American police go to Israel to get training. And that is something that is a fact of the matter. Nobody can deny that we've actually had Jewish progressive allies who have been calling on police departments across their country to end these exchange programs. In fact, it's called End the Deadly Exchange Program, or campaign by groups like Jewish Voice for Peace. And so our struggle is interconnected. The discrimination that Palestinians experience, even the Palestinians who live within Israel, not the ones who live under occupation. There are over 50 laws on the books in the state of Israel that discriminate against people who are not Jewish. So we have to understand that in democracy, you can't call yourself a democracy if 50 laws on the books discriminate against the Palestinian people and other minorities who live in the state of Israel. And that is the reality of the Palestinian people. I don't like to do numbers, Erica. I don't like to say, look how many people died in look how many Palestinians versus look how many Israelis. Innocent people don't deserve to die. It doesn't matter to me if they're Israelis or Palestinians. They do not deserve to die. But what I tell people is that the accountability and responsibility is on the Israeli government. They are the superpower here. They are the power dynamic has to be part of the context of the conversation. And so as I talk to people about this, I say, listen, context matter, facts matter, history matters, narrative matters, and also centering marginalized voices. Palestinians, you don't see Palestinians up until last week or the 2 weeks before. You hardly ever saw a Palestinian on CNN or on MSNBC bringing the perspective of the Palestinian people to mainstream America. And that's been intentional because America, and this is the very important part about our complicity. People will say, why do you think that the American governments, Democrats and Republicans, to be clear, have been so complicit and they've been so silent? And people have asked me over and over again, they're like, why do you think that is? And I say, well, if the American government, which by the way is a settler colonial state itself, like this is, I mean, in order for America to exist right now, it required the displacement and ethnic cleansing of indigenous people. So that means that if the American government or the American project comes out forcefully against apartheid and against what is happening in Israel-Palestine, it almost questions the legitimacy of the United States. And the American government doesn't want that because really it's the same thing. And so that's the context. And also, as you know, and this is also facts, the strength of the pro-Israel lobby in America is not to be underestimated. They are well-funded, they are well-resourced. And we know this in the ways in which they engage in democratic, electoral politics. They fund candidates to support Israel unequivocally. They write talking points for elected officials. You notice that elected officials, you're like, wait a minute, this statement sounds like that guy's statement and that guy's statement, because they send around talking points, they do lobby days, and they are very influential. And also, Erica, one other important myth about when we're talking about the pro-Israel lobby in America is that there is a misconception that all Zionists or all right-wing Zionists are Jews. That's actually not fact in America. Overwhelming majority of right-wing Zionists in America are Christian Zionists. They are evangelical Christian Zionists who helped elect Donald Trump. They are infatuated with this idea of the state of Israel. Now, mind you, it's not because they love Jewish people or they love the state of Israel. It's because they believe that the state of Israel is fulfilling some prophecy for evangelicals or right-wing evangelicals. And so people have to understand that dynamic of the participation and the power and strength of Christian Zionists in America. And that's why sometimes, I went to a conference a couple of years ago. It just happened to be in the same hotel as the conference of a group called KUFI, which stands for Christians United for Israel. And I was there, and in the lobby area, I saw these two older Black women. And you know me, I'm very connected. I'm me and the older Black women, we just get down. So I had some courage and I walked into them. They're sitting drinking coffee. But the reason why I knew they were at the conference because they were wearing the, like the little registration things around their neck. So I went over there to them and I said, oh, peace and blessings be upon you. And they were very kind and very gracious to me and very sweet. The woman pulled up a chair. I started having a conversation with her and I said, what are you doing at this conference? And the woman just straight up told me, she's like, we don't know. We just came with our pastor. The pastors also are bringing busloads of people to these conferences without putting the context of why they're there. There should never be a reason why marginalized people are at a conference of a group that supports the discrimination and the ethnic cleansing of a people to fulfill their own prophecy or whatever it is, something that is so outrageous, I don't even know how to explain it. And I know that other Christians can explain the views of evangelicals in a way that I can't. But that's also part of it. The power of the Christian Zionist movement in America is not to be underestimated.
That is so true. And John Hagee is one of the key leaders of Kufi and doing a lot of work. And that is a strong group. I know I'm a part of Fosna's group, Black Christians for Palestine. And I know Fosna has been on the forefront of trying to do work around, counter, protests to Kufi and a lot of the work they're doing. But Linda, you said so much in there. And one thing I want to hit back to was the global network, because this is a global fight for liberation, as you talked about in South Africa and everything that's happening. What is the United Nations doing around the topic of Israel and Palestine?
What's so interesting, Erica, is that when you look at the nations that make up the United Nations, the overwhelming majority are in solidarity with the Palestinian people. The problem we have here is the UN Security Council, which includes Israel and includes the United States and other Western powers who are not, in fact, in solidarity with the Palestinian people. But overwhelming majority are. And the UN has put out statement after statement. The problem is they don't have teeth. They don't have prosecutorial authority when it comes to what's happening in Israel, Palestine. And that's why, we don't always call on the UN to do what they need to do. We go to places like the ICC, which is the International Criminal Court, who, by the way, is being led by a Black African woman right now, who was the one that determined the jurisdiction that they have now around bringing a case against Israel for war crimes against the Palestinian people. And so the UN, unfortunately, has been lame duck. They really haven't been able to do anything. They don't have the power to do anything. In fact, the United States government, just in the last 48 hours, they literally opposed a resolution from the UN for a ceasefire. Why would the United States of America be against a ceasefire? I just don't understand it. We've also watched the Biden administration cowardly on this particular issue. And by the way, to be clear, I wasn't, surprised by it. I never, I wasn't under any impression that Biden was going to be a champion for the Palestinian people. But even during a press conference with Ned Price, who's the spokesperson for the White House, he was pressed multiple times by journalists. And they pressed him on this, making some sort of commentary about the slaughter of children. That is a moral question to ask. I don't care who you are. I don't care if you're pro-Israel, not pro-Israel. You have to at least be able to say, it is unacceptable that children are being murdered right now, literally slaughtered in this moment. And he literally found every way to go around the question. Then we hear parroted talking points from the administration. Israel has a right to defend itself. What about the Palestinian people? Under international law, they too have a right, Erica, to defend themselves. If someone came to your home to steal your home from you, to dispossess you and to displace you, you have every right in America. There are laws that protect you to defend your home, to defend your family. Why is it that we will defend everyone's right to defend themselves except when it comes to the Palestinian people? What are they supposed to do? Roll over and play dead and watch their elders humiliated, see their homes being destroyed, see their families displaced? It doesn't work. And we cannot be in a position as a people to tell the Palestinian people, you sit down and you stay oppressed and you let that military occupation go. And you stay in there without basic human rights, no right to travel, you checkpoints, making your life a living hell. You know what? You got to accept that. That's your life and that's all we have for you. It's not okay. And that's why we're speaking out in this way right now.
That's it. And that's the same thing that's happening to Black folks here in the U.S. and around the globe. It's the exact same thing. And it's so funny. I'm wearing my shirt tonight, Brother Malcolm X, who was very, a Muslim brother who was very involved in this struggle for the fight for the liberation of the Palestinian people. And this coming week, he would have been 96 years old. And so, Brother Malcolm was like, by any means necessary. Brother Malcolm was very clear. No, we're not going to sit down and we're not going to let you oppress us and we're going to be quiet. No, we're going to stand up and we're going to do something. Just tell us tonight, just You know, Brother Malcolm and so many folks in the Black community have been standing with the Palestinian folks. Why is it so important for us now? I want to speak directly to Black folks who, you know, we know Black Lives Matter is a big thing here in the US and around the globe. But if we don't see that Black Lives Matter is directly linked to the fight for Palestinian lives mattering, then we're missing something. Tell us tonight, Linda, how people, Black folks in particular, how we should be engaged in this struggle for the fight for the Palestinian people.
You know, Erica, my philosophy in my organizing for 2 decades, you know, I'm 40 years old. I just actually turned 41 years old. And ever since I started organizing, I saw the intersections between our communities. And I have been on the front lines of the movement for Black lives because I believe that when Black people are free, we're all going to be free, including the Palestinian people. Black Palestinian solidarity in particular is a threat. It is a threat to white supremacy, and it is a threat to apartheid states like Israel. It is why often you have seen in the movement, there has been an attempt to divide our movements. Groups like the Dream Defenders, Black-led young people in Florida have been defunded because of their powerful work to build the intersections and the connections between what is happening in Palestine and what is happening here in the United States. In fact, the Dream Defenders has actually led delegations of some of the most prominent Black activists in America to Palestine to show them firsthand so that they can come back and see and be able to say, I didn't read it in a book. It wasn't a Palestinian who told me. I went and saw it for myself. The history of Black Palestinian solidarity is long. And Malcolm X is one example of that. And, you know, and a lot of people, you know, this progressives, you know, right around Malcolm X's birthday or, you know, when around the anniversary of his assassination, people will quote Malcolm X. They'll put up the picture of Malcolm X and everybody's a revolutionary. Malcolm X says things that we need to honor his whole self. He said, if somebody puts their hands on you, send them to the cemetery. That's what Malcolm X said. Unless you want to act and say, I believe in everything except that. But that's what he said. He was a man who believed that you get to fight for your freedom by any means necessary. He actually said, if you are not ready to die for freedom, take that word out of your vocabulary. That's what Malcolm X said. And so if we're going to honor people like Malcolm X, we're going to have to honor the whole people. Kwame Ture, at the time, Stokely Carmichael, he went from university to university talking about the Zionist state and talking about the ideology of Zionism and how it opposed the civil rights and human rights movement that Black folks were working on and working in during the civil rights movement. SNCC wrote a letter in 1967 in solidarity with the Arab and Palestinian people. I mean, we have seen scholar after scholar, people like Angela Davis and so many others and scholars and academics and Reverend Jeremiah Wright, and we see Reverend Otis Moss III and so many people like you, Erica. We've seen the Reverend William Barber and many just kind of stepping out and saying, no, I'm not going to be afraid. I'm going to speak truth to power. If I'm calling on people to say this. We criticize America, you and me, Erica, every day. That's what I do because I believe in the potential of America, right? And I believe in us. And so I'm going to criticize my country. I'm also going to criticize Saudi Arabia. And I'm going to call on the US government to end arms deals to Saudi Arabia in the context of the war on Yemen and call them out for violation of human rights and women's rights in Saudi Arabia. I have no problem saying that. So we are not a selective people. When there is injustice, there is injustice. What I say to people all the time, Erica, that's important in this conversation, people will say, why Israel? Why are you so obsessed with the state of Israel? Because there are other nations that commit human rights violations. Of course there are. Nobody debates that point. But I do not fund North Korea to violate the human rights of the North Korean people. I am personally complicit with my taxpayer dollars, over $3.8 billion a year. And as Americans here, particularly in the context of a global pandemic, we have people who died because they didn't have access to health care. I'm part of a coalition for over the last 7 years fighting for Medicare for all because I believe every American and every resident of this country deserves health care. And you know what they tell me, Erica? I'm idealistic. There's no money. You think money grows on trees in America, but you found $3.8 billion to fund an illegal military occupation. You closed schools in Chicago. You closed clinics in poor Black and brown communities. In some cities, people don't have transportation and infrastructure. We can't house the houseless in America, but we have money to fund an illegal occupation. And that's the piece of information that I want the American people to understand. Your hard-earned taxpayer dollars are going to oppress the Palestinian people. And if there's anything that we could unite on, Erica, that's the point. And so, for example, there is a congresswoman in the great state of Minnesota named Betty McCollum. She's a white woman. She put forth a piece of legislation that conditions aid to Israel. And this is very rational. It just says, listen, if we're going to give you taxpayer dollars, you cannot use our tax dollars to annex more land from Palestinians. You can't use our taxpayer dollars to fund illegal settlement. You can't use our tax dollars to detain Palestinian children. Everybody should support that. There should be no reason why any member of Congress supports the idea of our taxpayer dollars stealing land, detaining Palestinian children, and continuing the funding of an illegal occupation. And so one thing that we could all do is call up our members of Congress. Remember, and you know this, Erica, we talk about this all the time. Members of Congress work for me. I don't work for members of Congress. Your member of Congress represents you. So if your member of Congress is on a platform right now supporting apartheid, I'm going to assume that you're okay with that, because your voices have to be louder than those who support apartheid. And so now we're starting to see something revolutionary that we've never seen before. On the House floor just 2 days ago, we watched member of Congress after member of Congress go to the floor, including the powerful testimony of Representative Cori Bush, a Ferguson activist and a member of Congress, who made clear connections between the struggle of Black people in America and those of Palestinians. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Rashida Tlaib, who is the first Palestinian American woman in Congress, Ilhan Omar, Representative Mark Pecan, Jan Schakowsky, Mary Newman from Chicago. We never seen this before. We might have had one guy like Bernie every once in a while say something good about Palestine, maybe another person or two sometime. But to see the courage that our members of Congress have, guess why? And guess where they're getting that courage from? And they've told it to me directly. It's from the people. When they see that they have political cover from their constituencies, when they see the loud voice of people saying justice for Palestinians, you give your members of Congress courage to say the truth, speak the truth, vote the truth. And that's what we need you to do more of.
That part, that is what we need to. Linda, you just said it, and I would love if you could just tell us a little bit briefly about the connection between Ferguson and Palestine, because I hope a lot of people know, like, there are some direct links. I mean, you've addressed a lot of it, but folks are in community together. So would you just shed a little light on that?
You know, I went to Ferguson in 2014 after the unjust and brutal murder of Mike Brown. And what was one of the most remarkable things I've ever seen in kind of real time is I watched Palestinian young people in Gaza who rarely have internet access. It's very intermittent. Watch on Twitter what was happening to Ferguson activists after the murder of Mike Brown. And the young Palestinians were literally on Twitter talking directly to Ferguson activists, telling them, hey, here's how you wash your eyes out with tear gas. Here's how you take a 2-liter plastic bottle, turn it over, cut it out, and make a mask to protect yourself from whatever it is that is being thrown at you by militarized police forces in the United States. They were showing solidarity, and the young people of Ferguson weren't like, who the hell is these people? They were you should have saw them. They were literally taking instruction by instruction. And the beautiful thing that happened in Ferguson all of a sudden is I would watch young Black people carry Palestinian flags. Some of them never heard of Palestine. But what they did know is there was solidarity. They knew that somebody across the world felt their pain, saw their trauma, and saw the brutalization that they were being afflicted upon by militarized police forces. And for the children of Gaza, the Palestinians in the West Bank, this is their life. Their whole entire villages are under militarized occupation. As you saw, Erica, Palestinians having to go through checkpoints. They allow Americans who travel thousands of miles across the waters to go into Jerusalem and be in a bus, and make the indigenous people of the land have to get off the bus and go through some metal encagement that is really made for cattle. That is supposed to be for cattle, not for human beings. And that's what they do. They dehumanize Palestinians on a daily basis. Children are put up against the wall and stop and frisk. If a child or a woman or a man questions that, immediately they are brutalized, as we've seen the brutalization of Black people at the hands of police forces. So that it's not just the connection, the moral connection to fighting for justice or fighting against occupation, which looks different and may be called different things in different places, but it's actually the same thing. And even when we talk about the expandment of illegal settlements in the United States of America, call me controversial, because I'm already controversial, Erica, so I'm gonna go the whole way. Yes. Gentrification, the pushing out of Black people from historic neighborhoods that they've lived in for hundreds of years.
That's
right?
It.
The building of developments literally in the middle of entire neighborhoods that price people out. So you may not be going to the homes of Black people and dragging them out the houses as you're doing to the Palestinian people in Sheikh Jarrah, but you found other more palpable ways to displace people and send people back to live in places that they don't want to live in because they could no longer afford to live in Fort Greene, in Crown Heights, in New York City, and in neighborhoods that literally great Black grandma lived in before. And so these are the connections that we have here. And so Black people are starting to see that now. The obstacles that we have, as you said, Erica, is the education. Because of course I know that when Black people understand the plight of the Palestinian people, it is a natural thing to find solidarity with the Palestinian people. But how will we do that if we don't have these conversations, if we don't have the platforms? I'm not on your television screen. I'm not on the big, platforms because people are afraid of the truth. They marginalized Malcolm X. They made sure they would put him on TV, cut him out of programs when he started saying things they didn't agree with. Because they know, Erica, that if you and me had the highest platforms in this land, we will change the minds and hearts of the people.
That's it.
That is it. What makes you and I powerful is I can sit in a room and talk to people and people are like, whoa, I'm moved here. What is wrong with me? What am I feeling here? And even when I tell people, when you hear me and you feel some sort of discomfort, it's not about me. Ask yourself, why do you feel uncomfortable? What is it that we're saying that makes you uncomfortable? Why it makes people uncomfortable is because it challenges decades old propaganda. It's literally crumbling, Erica, before our very eyes. And if there's one thing that's hopeful, even in the midst of the slaughtering of children, is that we are seeing a new, not a moment, a new movement and a new coalition and a new renewed call for justice for the Palestinian people. And I want to just say one last thing to people. So many of our great leaders have said things that I think we often quote them, but I don't know if we internalize them. When we go to the street, Erica, you and I have been in the street, we say no justice, no peace, no justice, no peace. It means something. It's not just a chant. There can be no peace without justice. And so please don't call for peace in the Middle East if you are not first calling for justice in the Middle East. If you are not calling for justice, you do not have any moral grounding to call for peace, because the Palestinian can't do peace without justice. And Nelson Mandela said this, and I remember Dr. King said something to this effect as well. Only free men can negotiate. Imprisoned people cannot negotiate with free people. You got to free the Palestinian people. You got to end the occupation. You got to put them on a fair grounding, and then we could come to the table. But right now we are prisoners in our own home, and until we are free, we cannot come to a negotiating table.
That's it. And I can hear the young folks, as they've been saying in the streets, if we don't get no justice, you don't get no peace. And that part is what we are here to today, because you just said it. They don't want to have you on the screen because you're going to tell the truth. And that is why we got to create our own platforms and do things to make that happen. And so tonight, that's why I really wanted us to get together. Linda, you're Muslim. I'm Christian. And the thing is, I follow that brown-skinned Palestinian Jew who, when he stepped on the scene, he said, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, for he's anointed me to preach good news to the poor, the house of Bethany, those made poor by society, to heal the brokenhearted, to set the captives free, and proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord now, which meant the Jubilee, canceling of debts, clearing out everything. And so I know if Jesus was here today, these are his people. He would be in the streets. He would be standing up against the American empire and all of the forces. So tonight you need to speak to the Christians, because they need to understand, if you following Christ, you better be following this liberation and this fight for the Palestinian people.
Erica, Jesus was born in Bethlehem.
That part.
Jesus of Nazareth, which we Palestinians call Al-Nasra. Jesus was a Palestinian Jew. He was a Palestinian Jew. And Jesus, and and this is the thing about Christian evangelicals, and I mean right-wing evangelicals, of course, because there are some Christian evangelicals who are in solidarity and who have been part of our interfaith and social justice movement. If you're going to invoke Jesus and tell me and you want me to believe that Jesus would be in support of or would have been silent at the displacement of the creations of God in Palestine, then you are following some kind of Christianity that I know nothing about. Because the Christians that I know that follow Jesus Christ know that he was a socialist, that he was someone who fought for justice. He was murdered at the hands of empire. I mean, this was a man who healed the sick. He was someone who brought mercy to people. So it's for me to think that any other narrative would reinforce this idea that Jesus would support occupation is ludicrous. And that is why it's important for more Christians to speak up, because oftentimes religion is used to reinforce what is happening in places like Palestine. For us to be clear, what's happening in Palestine is not a religious conflict. This is not Muslim versus Jews. This is not Muslims versus Christians versus Jews. It's not a religious conflict. And that's important here because that's how people want to frame this. The land of historic Palestine is the land of three Abrahamic faiths to coexist. And you've been to Palestine, you've been to Jerusalem, the Church of Nativity, the temples, the Dome of Rock, the Al-Aqsa Mosque. The point of Jerusalem is a place for all Abrahamic faiths to show what it looks like when we coexist with one another. And we've always coexisted in peace and in harmony before the creation of the State of Israel. At least at the time of my grandmother living, again, born in 1927, she knew harmony. She said, I knew coexisted. I never had to worry about being murdered or being massacred. She said, I got up, I went, I drank my cup of tea, I went to the market. We know peace. And and people like her, you know, I saw the sign yesterday at a Palestinian elder in a protest here in New York. And she was holding a sign that said, I am older than the State of Israel. So how can you tell a woman who's still alive today about what belongs to who if she's telling you that I am older, born before 1948? And what happens to us Palestinians, Erica, is that the narrative is so coordinated from our opposition that it's like Palestinians are somehow a figment of our own imagination, that somehow we don't actually exist. Someone tells us that your existence is a lie, that I'm not the great granddaughter of Palestinians, that I am a person who can trace my lineage back in historic Palestine. And so that is what we are fighting against. Like, that's why Palestinians will say our existence is resistance. That's why sometimes, Erica, I don't even have to say anything. I could wake up in the morning and say good morning, and I'm already controversial because my walking and my talking and my breathing and existing as an unapologetic Palestinian is in of itself resistance to the dominant narrative that Palestinians don't in fact exist.
That's it. And so, Linda, I got to get you out of here, baby, because you stay on the front lines and you are always out here for the people. I really want to thank you tonight for taking time to come. And my heart has been even the more encouraged and stirred for us to see this is not a moment, family. If y'all don't take nothing from tonight, this is a movement. It's been going on for 73 plus years. And this is the time right now we have got to build power. So, Linda, tonight, because I want to be very clear in this work of justice. I'm from Saginaw, right next door to Flint, Michigan. And it's been 7 years since folks have had clean water in Flint. People still drinking bottled water. And what I heard is what I know. And so tonight, I don't want us to forget about the Palestinian people. We got that problem in this country. We'll go to protests and we'll do everything while it's hot. But we need to know that this is a matter that needs to end. The Palestinian people need to be free. So, Linda, tonight, tell people how they can get engaged, how they can build power and standing in solidarity with the Palestinian people and making sure people don't let this moment pass by. We have got to get change, and it is the time.
Amen. Amen, amen, amen.
Tell us how we can get involved. Tell us how we can do what we just do.
I mean, I just need people to stay steadfast and remember that if you would have been opposed to South African apartheid, this is your moment here today to be against the apartheid that is happening in Palestine right now. Call your member of Congress and demand that they sign on as a co-sponsor to Betty McCollum's bill conditioning aid to the State of Israel. Stay in the streets, keep having these conversations, use your social media responsibly, learn, read books from wonderful scholars like Mark Lamont Hill wrote a beautiful book about progressive except for Palestine. Noura Erakat wrote a book about justice and Palestinians. And there's so many more that we can, and I can give you that list that you could share with your people. Supporting organizations like FASNA, which is Friends of Sabeel of North America, which is an organization that really educates Christian allies about what's happening in Palestine, Israel, and gives them a platform to organize. You know, stay in solidarity and keep these connections clear. And again, it's all about education. When they say, Erica, knowledge is power, it's really not a cliche. When I'm educated about an issue, it gives me the power to do something about it. So keep being educated. Let me be your Palestinian friend. If there's a question, if there's an article, please send it to me. My DMs are open on Instagram, on many other platforms, and I'd love. My email is public. It's linda@untilfreedom.com. Send me an email. I'm ready to answer all of your questions, because this is what it's about. It's about education, and it's about dialogue.
That's it. And so, Linda, tonight we want to thank you for being here. And as she just said, hopefully y'all can see on the screen right now, there are different organizations that you can follow to be engaged. The Adala Justice Project, the U.S. Campaign for Palestinian Rights, the Friends of Seville North America, FOSNA. There's a group called Black Christians for Palestine. The sign-up link is here. Please screenshot this. Get engaged. I'm a member of that group. It's a powerful group. The Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference is doing a lot of amazing work around Palestine. The People's Forum out of New York, and the Arab Resource and Organizing Center. Check these groups out. And I would then even say to you all, please follow these key people on social media. Sister Linda just told you, follow her. Nora Ekrak, follow her. Sandra Tamari, Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, Dr. Mitri Rayab, Phyllis Bennis, Mark Lamont Hill, Brother Torian Webb, Reverend Waltrina Middleton, Reverend Niall Fort. These are folks who have been doing research on Palestine, have been there and know this. So follow them. And then these are some books for you all to look up. Face in the Face of Empire. Look at this list. Black Power in Palestine. For Palestine, as Linda talked about, by Brother Mark Lamont Hill. Torian Webb did an amazing curriculum on journeys toward justice. You can do this with your churches. And then Understanding the Palestinian-Israeli Conflict by Phyllis Bennis. Check this information out, y'all. Please don't let tonight just be you coming to be a hearer, and don't be a doer. And so tonight we're leaving you with this great knowledge. Linda, we thank you for being here tonight. We love you. We love the Palestinian people. We with you. I mean that. I'm not saying that. I mean that. We not going to stand by. We going to stand up with you. And so tonight we leave here in solidarity together saying, Palestinian lives matter. Palestinian lives matter. Palestinian lives matter. And we gonna fight until justice is served for your people, Linda, and for our people. That's Black Lives Matter too on tonight.
Until freedom.
Until freedom. Until freedom comes, we gonna keep on marching. God bless you all. Thank you for being with us tonight. We'll be having more conversations on this particular topic in the near future. Good night.